Thanks to everyone for being here today for this third panel. As we were mentioning earlier, we are indeed discussing about evaluating some technologies to increase accessibility of legal information. We're lucky to have 4 panelists today for this for the third block. So it's gonna need a bit of discipline to fit in 1 hour, since the panels plan to end at 4:30. So I won't be longer than that. Let's start with Aurore, who's gonna present Justice Project. Aurore is a PhD student in law and innovation at the University of Montreal and HEC Paris. Her research focuses on the normative value of computer code and digital platforms. Aurore works as a research assistant at the Cyberjustice Lab, where she mainly works on the development of machine learning algorithms for the analysis of court decisions. Aurore also works for the Smart Law Hub, a research lab in law and artificial intelligence attached to HEC Paris and the Institut Polytechnique. Aurore, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Eve, and I'm happy to share my research with all of you. So I will share my screen. Does it work? Can you see my screen? Yes, okay. Thank you. So I will present today one aspect of our research at the cyberjustice laboratory, and in particular, I'm willing to answer the following question, like how to measure the effectiveness of a legal information technology. So Hannes already presented the JusticeBot research project, and on my side, I will more focus on the part related to the access to legal information. So first, I will do a brief introduction of how we are providing access to a legal court decision and summaries of those decisions. Then I will just explain like how we can promote access to legal information through the use of artificial intelligence. And then I will present you how we tried really to evaluate the technology that we are developing to access legal information. So as Hannes explained, laymen have trouble resolving their legal issues because of the complexity of the law. So this is why JusticeBot is trying really to empower people to facilitate access to legal information by really simplifying the law and the court's decision. So JusticeBot is asking questions to users so that we can understand their situation and provide a tailored legal information. This is why we decided to develop this platform, in the sense that we have on one side one question that is asked to user. So here, for example, you can say that the question is the tenant often late in paying the rent? And then we provide the users with examples of similar cases that have been identified by an algorithm to just provide the user with example of similar cases in which the answer is either yes or no to the legal question. So here you can see on the screen that we provide both a link to the original decision and a summary of this decision. The summaries so far are drafted by legal experts, which are part of the cyberjustice laboratory. So here we really wanted to implement artificial intelligence techniques that could allow us to improve the platform and the user experience. To do so, we rely on an iterative process. So each time we are trying to improve JusticeBot by updating the pathway depending on the evolution of the law on one side, but also in order to really align with our users' need, which means that we are trying to really analyze how the users are interacting with the platform in order to improve JusticeBot and to answer the needs of our users. So to analyze the interaction between the users and the platform, we relied on the data analytics that are provided through the website. So, for example, we try to know like how long a user is staying on JusticeBot, whether he has clicked on other links, for example. And we also have on the JusticeBot platform evaluation page in which really user can provide us with information regarding their experience and can really explain us whether they were satisfied or dissatisfied with our services. Thanks to this user feedback, we are orienting our research in order to improve the platform. So regarding the summarization of court decision, we understood that between reading a full text decision and a summary, or users who are lay people are usually not reading the full text decision. So here we discovered that more than 80% of our users do not click on the link that goes to the original decision and only read the summaries that have been drafted by our experts. So this is why we decided to know whether we could really automatize the summarization of legal court decision. And to do so, we decided to use state-of-the-art natural language processing techniques and to apply them to a French legal court decision written in French, but Quebecois one. And here, so for example, we used abstractive text summarization techniques in order to provide as input text a full text decision and to automatically generate a summary. So briefly, our methodology consists in provide as an input text to an algorithm the question asked by JusticeBot, the answer of our users, and a full text decision. Then we use Barthez, which is a model of natural language processing, which is working on French language. And as an output text, we have an automatically generated summary of a court decision. So we did this with a data set of 150 humanly drafted summaries and the related cases and the related question in the JusticeBot platform. And we had lots of automatically generated summaries, and we decided to evaluate them just to see whether we could already include those summaries in the platform or whether we could improve our method and the techniques to really automatize the summarization task. So as with any natural language processing research, we started by applying automatic metrics to trying to evaluate the automatically generated summaries. And you can see here on the table that we really evaluated different methods that we used to see whether the summaries that were automatically generated reached good grades in terms of natural language processing tasks. However, we really quickly understood that this automatic evaluation of summaries couldn't provide us with enough information to know whether those summaries were good enough. So we decided to create a scheme for the human evaluation of the automatically generated summaries. We used this scheme with 2 legal experts and 1 data scientist. And this scheme consists in 4 main steps. So the scheme consists in first reading the full text decision of the cases. Then the evaluator has to read the humanly drafted summary that we already had in our data set. Then the evaluator will read the automatically generated summary to really compare the full text decision, the humanly drafted summary, and the automatically generated summary. And from this, we created the evaluation form online, thanks to Google Form. And this evaluation form consists in 7 questions, and each evaluator had to rate the summaries from 1 to 4. So here, for example, we asked the question, do the generated summaries reflect the elements described in the humanly drafted summary? So each evaluator had to rate the automatically generated summaries. And this helped us to really compare the different artificial intelligence techniques that we applied to see which summaries reached the best scores in order to really identify which algorithm and which method gave the best result. So we had this really general understanding of how our techniques were efficient in terms of producing summaries, but it was not enough to really assess whether those summaries could be used on our platform and whether they could really inform lay people. This is why we had really to go more into the details of those summaries. And here on the screen, you can see that I provided 2 examples of summaries which were containing legal mistakes. So here in the first example, we have summaries which were humanly drafted with a good legal period according to which a payment of the rent is late. And then we have the automatically generated summaries, which really seems correct grammatically and on the form, but which provide a wrong legal period. Then you can see in the second example that there is again a mistake in the interpretation of the law, because, for example, in the humanly drafted summary, it is said that the notification is not valid because it is written in French while the contract is in English. And in the automatically drafted summaries, we found out that it was say exactly the opposite. So here we understood that we cannot just evaluate automatically generated summaries by checking the grammar or the correctness of the sentence. And we really need to have a legal expert to check the correctness of the automatically generated summaries. And this is really a first experiment that we started a few months ago, but it already provides us with interesting findings towards the evaluation of artificial intelligence techniques to provide access to legal information. Because what we understood is that a successful task in terms of natural language processing can be really incorrect regarding the law. So when we provide legal information, we cannot use efficient natural language processing techniques because it doesn't mean that we will provide a correct legal information. So this is the first point that I think it's really interesting regarding our study. And then we are really working on the development of human evaluation scheme because we understood that we really need to have a human review of the automatically generated summaries. So this is why we are now working on a scheme that could be used by legal experts, but also by lay people in order to understand whether the language that is used is clear enough, for example. And finally, we also think that it's very important to keep a human in the loop when we are dealing with legal information, because as we've seen with the analysis of the automatically generated summaries, we can really provide summaries that contain legal mistakes. And to check this, we really need to keep legal experts reviewing those summaries. So this is a global presentation, but I would be happy to discuss more about this during the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Aurore. It was a fascinating presentation, and I feel like it's footsteps what Nicolas said in the previous presentation. So that was how Justice But thinks about evaluating their work. Now we're going to hand the mic to Sandrine, who is going to present how the Adage team is working on assessing the accuracy and the effectiveness of the translation tool of the plumitif. The floor is yours, Sandrine.
Thank you so much, Eve. Alors, merci beaucoup, Eve. Bonjour tout le monde. Ça me fait vraiment très plaisir aujourd'hui d'être avec vous. Je remercie beaucoup d'ailleurs Eve et Pierre-Luc d'avoir organisé cette rencontre et de m'y avoir convié à partager mes travaux de recherche. Peut-être avant de commencer, j'aimerais faire quelques mises en garde, some disclaimers. Alors, comme vous le savez, moi, je ne suis pas versée en sciences juridiques. J'aime mieux le dire d'avance parce qu'il y a quand même un petit peu beaucoup de monde dans le domaine aujourd'hui. Par ailleurs, je suis francophone, mais à la demande d'Ève, je vais faire ma présentation en anglais. Et finalement, pour faire vraiment différent de tout le monde, je n'ai pas de PowerPoint parce que, comme le thème aujourd'hui de ce panel le veut, je souhaite évaluer la qualité de votre écoute, n'est-ce pas? OK, ceci était une blague, donc let me begin after those few disclaimers. So let's talk about the research context first. As Alexandra mentioned earlier, I work for the ADAGE research project. Yes, so it's Accès au droit et à la justice, and I'm leading chapter 3, which is one of 23, if I remember. I mean, Pierre Noro will correct me if I'm wrong. But in any case, we realized that in this chapter, working on court records and how they could be accessed by citizens in general, and we found that the need for litigants and citizens in general to access those court records was something that needed to be improved. And so from there, we had this first research questions or general research questions. Can computers or digital tools in general can constitute a better access to court records? And what I mean by computers or digital tools is more precisely either the old legacy 3270 system, which is really like the dinosaur of computer ages, or the online version that you can find on the Sokush platform. So our combined expertise is with Florence Milran and Pierre, and of course, Alexandra, that you've heard in the first panel. We've combined our disciplines, which are sociology of uses and human-computer interaction or user experience, in the context of marketing, digital marketing in my case. This combination actually led us to deepen the varied user profiles, including professionals in this matter. And so, as Alexandra told you, we started with mini interviews at the Montreal's courthouse and at Sokish, and those led to larger questions about the technological mediation. And we actually found out that this was way beyond technology. This is a matter of the complexity of multiple layers. And Alexandra mentioned them based on the Vanjik model. And those are actually the basic 4 layers that you can find as obstacles or pain points to access. The first one is either hardware, software, but digital interfaces. So you can interpret that the way you want, but the software and the hardware combine in digital interfaces, and they are hard to master, and they are not user-friendly in the case of what you can access at the courthouse right now for court record access documents. It's much better at the Sokish, on the Sokish website, but the problem is that on the Sokish website, you have to pay for them. I mean, the problem, I'm not saying it's a problem, I'm just saying the different inconvenience is that you have to pay for access to them. Then you have the level of skills, so digital, legal, information literacy, cognitive abilities, all those are skills, right, that we need to understand those and access those in a large sense, those records, court records. And the uses, the various uses are depending on the various user profiles that we discovered. So not just citizens, not just legal professionals, but many other professionals with various degrees of appropriation according to inequalities towards the court records. And then the motivation, as mentioned by Alexandra. So that was just to put you in context of our research. From there, what is next? that's what you're interested in. And it's the evaluation process that we have engaged in with the University of Laval team. So Eve and Pierre-Luc, of course. We are about to begin a new study where we are going to try and go beyond what is a readable court record, because this is not necessarily a comprehensible court record, as Eve concluded in her presentation. So a comprehensible court record is still an issue, and it is maybe hard and maybe impossible to solve with technology. I agree with Eve on that. But at least we can try, and this is the idea of how evaluation could help us do that. And this is not to say that this will solve the problem, and it's not to say that it can be solved without any human intervention. It's just to say that maybe if we try other evaluation tools, maybe we can actually pinpoint a more precise layer to work on. And then in an iterative way, just like Miriam mentioned in the user-centered design approach, it could lead us to find the right spot to develop focus AI that would work on those elements that are most necessarily needed by the various users. So this is a very long-term project, if you understand me well, but the idea is that we actually are in the direction of trying to try if it could be an interesting one. That's where we are. You know, science, how it is. It's a long word and it's a long road process. So since solving the issue is not a goal, let's try and better understanding at which layer pain point is occurring. So I would start with presenting our research protocol for this new collaborative project with Eve and Pierre-Luc. So we'll first have deep interviews with litigants. It would be a sample of 15, and then another sample of various professionals for 15, and then 3 to 5 participants from all other categories. So it could be the legal people, the law students, but also the HR managers, the journalists, the insurance brokers, the homeowners, etc. And then we'll combine those deep interviews, so this first qualitative phase of the research, with eye tracking glasses. Those would be mobile, and they would help us identify reading patterns, whether they are for interest or for lack of understanding. That's the idea behind using this technology in terms of measurement. So the research, one second, I beg your pardon. So the research protocol, sorry about that, would work like this. We would have an experimental design with a 2-level one-way factor, so 2 conditions, 2 groups. And we would compare those 2 conditions or 2 versions of the court record or the plumitif, the Sokish online version that is available right now, and an AI powered simplified version, as Eve and Nicolas presented before. So the idea would be to ask each participant to proceed with a free navigation task of 2-3 minutes towards a specific goal, a goal task-oriented browsing, if you want. This would be to reflect the functional literacy we talked about before, because the idea is that we want to understand functional literacy, right? Not just literacy. So the The idea is that we would follow this up with qualitative questions. So very specific questions. So like, when was this court record open? How many charges are there in this case? Or a few scenarios like, imagine you're a lawyer, imagine you're a journalist, a litigant, an HR manager. And in this case, for instance, for the HR manager, we would ask him to identify whether the names are identical, but the birth dates are non-identical, and whether it's the same case. So those are examples of the task that we would ask the various participants. What is relevant and interesting to use eye tracking in this research design to measure and compare court records comprehensibility? That's the question you must be asking yourself. So I will try to answer that now. First, it's observational direct measurement. It's based on behavior. And this is to compare with reported measurement, which we know all that has an inherent bias, if not many. And using eye tracking, we have some useful metrics that we can use to evaluate the pertinence and the interests of the various participants in the various information that are presented to them. First, you could have time to first fixation in a screen, so what is seen and catches the eye first. Then the number of fixations, it corresponds to attention being captured, how it's captured in terms of intensity, and fixations total duration, or pupil duration, and this corresponds to what keeps you attentive. I mean, without knowing whether it reflects a case of interest or a lack of understanding, but at least we would know that you have focused on those areas and your attention were drawn to it. So this is directly linked to the cognitive load that we were talking before, for instance, with Miriam in the second panel. So if I can conclude on that, this would lead to rich data and rich analysis for a better understanding of what is the participant is exactly experiencing regarding the court record comprehensibility. And we could use the triangulation of the direct and the reported measurements to make sure we understand whether pupil dilation, for instance, is due to interest or is due to lack of understanding. And in the end, it would be great, and this would be the goal, to better identify which layer is more specifically involved when there is an obstacle to understanding or a pain point, and whether it's depending on which of the various court record uses we have identified before, or user profiles. So for instance, we could identify whether the normalized view can ease some pain points, leaving us with a more bare situation of what is left still not comprehensible, which elements of the document associate with what layer according to Van Dijk's multi-layer model to be concrete. And ideally, this would help and better orient future AI-focused developments to better support court record comprehensibility, where Nicolas could help us, and hence further orient observational research in an iterative fashion according to the user-centered design method, and refine the technology to better support user understanding in that context, as Miriam mentioned. So that's it for me. I hope you have many questions. I'm all ears.
Thank you very much, Sandrine, for this very interesting presentation. And I'm thrilled to have Amy Salyzyn and Jacquelyn Burkell from respectively University of Ottawa and Western University. Their work has inspired all of this research protocol that was just presented by Sandrine, so I'll let them talk about it. So, Professor Salyzyn, the floor is yours.
Merci, and bonjour. You can hear me okay? Slides, wonderful. So Professor Burkell and I will be sharing our time. I'm going to start off a bit by talking about our work on court forms and using a functional literacy approach to evaluate. And it does sound, I wasn't able to join earlier today. It does sound you talked about some of these concepts, so I'll aim not to be too repetitive and talk about our work, which it sounds like at least some of you are familiar with. Just the first initial point on this term accessibility. Of course, as everybody here knows, it's a concept you can use a variety of different ways. And in our work, we're just looking at one particular problem, court form barriers to people using them, and using one framework for evaluating accessibility, functional literacy. So there's a variety of other ways you can look at this problem. And so just acknowledging that this is just one perspective and one way at getting at the challenges. I'll go through this first part pretty quickly. Why did we decide to study court form complexity? Not surprising probably to anybody, but there's an increasing number of self-represented litigants in our courts, a number of studies confirming this, and often this isn't by choice. People can't afford to have a lawyer. And so that means that self-represented people are left to navigate the court system, including court paperwork by themselves. And McFarland's study pointed out, among many other things, that forms are really a pain point, to use some of that wording from the previous presentation, that we hear from people that court forms are a major source of frustration and problems for people. They can't fill them out. They're very difficult to understand. The forms are designed for lawyers. These are quotes from people that participated in that study. And so not only does that create a pain point of which can cause stress, maybe lead people to give up on pursuing their claim, it can also have really substantive consequences as well. And you'll see the quote from a study participant there saying that, in that particular case, the individual filled out the wrong form and it led them to not being able to see their son. So court forms are important and they can be hard for people to use. And so working with Professor Burkell, we thought, why not try and, we know that court forms cause people problems, but we don't necessarily know why exactly. What kind of analytical framework can we use to help people understand more precisely exactly why this is causing a problem, and thinking about how to intervene and potentially improve the situation. So what is functional literacy? Again, it sounds like we've heard a lot about that today, so I'll go through this quickly. It's an approach to measuring accessibility of documents. It's used to evaluate documents that people interact with, so documents that are used to complete tasks. So it's not a way to evaluate the complexity of a novel per se, but things like forms, court forms, tax forms, prescriptions even perhaps. And the methodology recognizes that difficulty depends on the document, the task people are asked to do, and then the relationship between them. So literacy, sometimes people think about, well, what's your reading level, et cetera. This looks at a much more kind of interactive approach. And so to take a very simple example, one I like to use and one that came up in our court form study, many people are going to be familiar with the term address and understand its dictionary definition meaning, but people won't necessarily know what to do when a court form says to fill in an address. If it's not specified, is it their address, the court's address, the opposing party's address? And the task difficulty also may depend, if it's a court address, how easy is it to locate that address, things like that. And so a functional literacy approach applies very specific techniques to try to get at those things. That's an extremely simplified example. Of course, you can use this technique to identify other types of problems. Are you asked simply to fill in information you already know? Are you asked to generate an explanation? If there's math to be done, how complex is that math? And what's helpful about this approach is that it provides kind of a framework and a rigor to trying to identify precisely what the pain points are. And once you identify the pain points, you can kind of compare them about what we know to be the average level of functional literacy of Canadians, and then try and focus on not necessarily improving the user's abilities or skills, but how can we make the court form basically universal design that more people can use. Background to a current project we're working on were two previous studies of paper-based court forms. One involved using a functional literacy approach to assign complexity levels to fields in different court forms, 4 different court forms. And the idea wasn't to give these forms kind of a scientific score, but again, to apply some rigor to understand which tasks were complex and why. And then we did a human-based study to have people go through the forms using hypothetical scenarios, people that weren't legally trained, and then seeing where the issues were. And we found that largely that human-based study did validate our quantitative study, that we also found additional things that human users were able to point out. What did we find? Some of you have read the reports before, nothing too surprising. A lot of obvious areas of potential intervention and improvement, using legal terms, sometimes using abbreviations, things like that. We found that a lot of these forms came with guides that were more complex than the forms themselves, or didn't always use consistent terms. Here's just an example of some of the analysis we did on the quantitative side. I don't want to go to it in any detail, but we basically had 2 great research assistants taking hundreds of hours to go through each task and provide, again, a very analytical assessment of what might make a form complex. And I'm happy to talk to people about that approach if they're interested. What are the interventions? What are some best practices? Nothing that would be a surprise to this group here. Using the appropriate reading level, plain language, being specific about acronyms. It's amazing how some forms use inconsistent abbreviations, for example. Document literacy, also thinking about how people are designing the document. There's also lots of best practices that forms aren't always using. So that was 2 studies we did on paper-based or PDF, kind of flat court forms. One of our recommendations in terms of potential interventions was thinking about using digital forms, because one of the things with these forms is individuals weren't always provided, they weren't provided kind of a tailored part of the form that they actually needed to use. It would be provided the whole form. That created more complexity. Sometimes, for example, in family law, you're making one particular type of claim, you don't need the whole form. People weren't able to kind of get pop-up definitions of the legal terms, for example, as well. And so we thought digital forms could be a potential improvement. And so that brings us to the partnership with CLEO, Community Legal Education Ontario. The project is funded by the Law Foundation. And in that project, we wanted to examine, do automated forms, do guided pathways help to eliminate some of that court form complexity? Can we also use functional literacy insights to improve the design of the forms? What made the functional literacy framework tell us about remaining challenges? And so CLEO partnered with us. We looked at guided pathways they have for family law forms. These are guided pathways people can use to auto-generate a form that can be then directly filed with the courts. They first used our functional literacy insights to kind of do a base improvement to their guided pathways. And then we basically wanted to gather user information on any remaining areas of difficulty. So we did this in 2 ways. First, we recruited individuals without legal training to walk through hypothetical scenarios as if they were a self-represented litigant in that situation. And second, we also analyzed anonymized real data from individuals that had already used the forms. Hundreds of people have used these forms so far. We're in the process of writing up the outcome of that study. And we really look forward to hearing from this group and presenting to interested people when we have that ready. I think I have a couple minutes left. I just wanted to highlight 2 kind of challenges that we've thought about. Thinking about when you're trying to do evaluation using actual individuals and users. What are the ethical issues when you're in the justice space? So when we were doing our kind of talk aloud evaluation with individuals, we didn't use actual individuals embedded or implicated in the justice system. We used people who responded to kind of a university survey, and they used the hypotheticals. And that was simply for the fact that we saw ethical issues with kind of using, a randomized controlled trial with people implicated in the justice system. What do we do when someone actually who needs family law help is filling out a form where we see errors they're making and not being able to intervene? There's no solicitor-client privilege attached to that. So we ended up using a proxy and knowing that we might not necessarily get the exact type of data we wanted. We did hope to kind of fill that gap with anonymized data from users. And that's also caused some other challenges. What we found was the system that Clio's had set up wasn't necessarily capturing all the data we wanted. So I heard in the previous presentation, being able to understand how long someone might spend on a particular question and that kind of thing. That wasn't actually data that their system was currently capturing. They weren't necessarily currently capturing where individuals were exiting the system, if they were exiting. And we found kind of, and not surprising with a lot of legal data, some kind of incomplete data, messy data, things like that. And I know that's kind of one insight I think Clio's taking to try and improve the system. And it just got us to think about, evaluation by design, building, and you build these tools, getting the people that are building them for you, understanding that maybe you want to use data points to evaluate it and thinking about what data points you want to capture. It was a wake-up call to me. I kind of assumed once this is computerized, you can just put in your USB key and you have all the different amazing data points. That's not the case at all. And then also complexities with making sure you anonymize as much as possible. And then the growing understanding about, to what extent can you actually anonymize things. The last point I'll just make is just on broad questions. And I think we heard some of this in previous presentations. When you have a complicated system like family law, just like court dockets, how far can you reduce complexity with kind of an automated system? To what extent does actually the system itself have to change? On the flip side, if the underlying system is complicated, is there any risk of trying to simplify things through a tool? And then, also thinking about the need, I think we'll see this, that even if you have these great guided pathways, you really do still need kind of a human in the loop, in the sense of people may need human help as they're going through it for a variety of reasons. And again, that may be something where you need automation plus that targeted assistance for people, whether or not it's from a lawyer or not. I think is an interesting question, but it's not going to be enough just to have pop-ups, definitions, and things like that for individuals to really make it accessible for everyone. With that, I'll turn it over to Jackie. Thanks for your time today.
So I'm just trying to think about what to do here because we are very short on time. Just a second. I didn't share my screen before I did that. Let me share my screen, and I hope if I do this, it'll share properly. And if it doesn't, then we might just... Is that sharing properly?
Yes.
Okay. So I too apologize. I wasn't able to come earlier, and it sounds like both you covered a lot of really interesting ground and really important ground. And I will say that I am not a lawyer. I'm a social scientist. In fact, I'm a cognitive psychologist by training who's had the privilege of working with lawyers on issues that intersect with cognitive psychology as a practice and the kind of research. So I just want to talk briefly, and I'm going to go quite briefly, about a project that I did some time ago that really takes advantage of a functional literacy approach to make something that is tough, easy. And just to start off, and there we go. Okay, so functional literacy is all about accessibility. And this is an absolutely beautiful staircase at the Gallery of Chicago Riverwalk. And this is a staircase that Arthur Erickson developed for Robson Square. And you can immediately see, looking at this, that they both serve their purpose as staircases, and they'll actually both serve a great purpose as public spaces to be. But this staircase also serves a really important purpose of accessibility. It doesn't make it any less useful for people who aren't in wheelchairs. It just makes it much more useful and it makes it accessible for people who are mobility challenged. And I think in general, we need to think about accessibility in that way. They've known this in the disability community for a very long time. Functional design that's functional for people who are living with physical challenges turns out to be functional for all of us. And this is the same thing. I think that we think about literacy often as we need to change the user, we need to make them better. But really, what we need to do, or what we can do in many cases, is change the task environment. Sometimes a tough task is tough because we make it tough, not because it needs to be tough. So I did an earlier project quite some time ago on privacy policies, which are obviously legalistic kinds of documents. And we did this work with kids. And what we did was we looked at websites that kids were using, and we looked at the privacy policies that were on those websites. We downloaded them, we gave them to kids and said, can you take a look at these? And first of all, they said, we don't read them. But then we made them read them. And they said, wow, like these things are impossible to understand. And really, we asked them what they would say to designers, and they would say things that sound like functional literacy things. Use simple language. Tell us what you're talking about. Get organized. Show us where things are. Make things less scary. They were very clear what had to happen in order to make these privacy policies understandable. We then went to the literature and we extracted a bunch of design principles. And again, these are functional literacy design principles. They will be familiar to all of us. Using simple words, avoiding double like negatives, using active as opposed to passive language. None of these are surprises. What we then did was we wanted to know whether, does it really make a difference if you do this? Like, does it really actually, if you redesign a policy consistent with these best practices, does it actually make a difference? And what we did was we created two versions of the policies, a shortened original, because believe me, they're very long documents, so we cut out some of the stuff that didn't need to be there, and a version that was redesigned, same information as the shortened original, according to the design principles. And then we had the youth read the policies, and we did all the right things. We did a counterbalanced design, and it was, I think, within subjects design, and we counterbalanced order. There's all sorts of mechanistic things that we did. And we asked them to do two really simple things. We gave them a very short comprehension test, said, can you answer these questions? And then we asked them later on to give us their feedback about the policies. And this is the shortened original policy. Pretty much, not quite a screenshot, but this is what it looked like. In fact, there's some extra blank space in there that wasn't in there in the policy. So it's basically blocks of text with lots and lots of words. And this is the revised version. Same content. We added a lot of white space. We added sort of an overview of what they were going to see. We gave them explicit questions and note, what information do we collect about you? We collect the following information about you. We used repetitive language because, in fact, that makes things easier to understand. And throughout the document, for example, we used what information we collect about you. Sorry, that was not what I meant to do. So again, really simple. And I understand completely that companies have absolutely no reason to do this, but we thought we should ask the question of, if we went through this effort, would it help? And the results were overwhelming. And on our simple comprehension question, 77% of the people who read the policies got it right in the revised version and 47% on the original version. And they overwhelmingly, it's not just that we can test them as being better, they overwhelmingly told us they preferred the revised version. It's easier to understand. We gave them definitions of key terms. They really like that. They like the better organization. They like the shorter paragraphs. They like the clear headings. No surprise. I would have been shocked if it had turned out any other way. But we didn't need to do anything very big to find this. So I think when you come back to it, you have to ask yourself the question. I did just the other day. I was trying to park my car and I was faced with a list of signs like this. And I went, oh my goodness, can I park my car? Can I not park my car? Imagine being faced like that compared to this. Same information, all encompassed, all thought through, all organized in a way that's accessible. There's absolutely no question who's going to make the right decision. The person, not the person faced with the lineup of signs, but in fact, the person faced with this really easy to understand. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your level of education is. It doesn't matter your age. None of it matters, except, I suppose, I take it back. If you're visually impaired, we have to do something different. But in every other respect, it's perfectly clear. A well-designed document, and you can think of this thing on the left as being a document, leads to better understanding than a poorly designed document. End of story. And we should strive in every case for well-designed documents to support decision-making, including participation in the legal system by the people that we work with. So, there we go. And I will stop sharing my screen.
I think this brings us to a close. This was, again, a very interesting discussion. I would like to thank you all who took part in the panel, and I would like to thank as well the Cyber Justice Lab and Sakij Weiss, I know, was a partner in this project from the beginning, both at at Adage and on our part. So it's been a pleasure to discuss with all of you. I've taken, just as Pierre-Luc did, many pages of notes, and I'm looking forward to reflect back on this, and hope to see you again soon, all of you. Thank you very much.